Alan Catterall. 2 days before Christmas, 2010. Pyranha Mouldings, a kayak and canoe factory on the Whitehouse Industrial Estate in Runcorn, Cheshire, England. Alan Catterall, 54, was the senior supervisor.
Hello.
12 years with the company. His wife worked there. One of his daughters worked there. And on the morning of December 23rd, one of his daughter's boyfriends, the young man she was about to marry, was also on shift. A fault had developed on one of the rotational molding ovens, the machines that bake molten plastic around steel frames to shape a kayak hull. The oven was taken out of service for about an hour while the fault was tracked down. The initial problem was fixed. The operator, Alan's future son-in-law, noted the machine was now working and switched it back on. He had no idea Alan had gone inside. The oven's design, developed in-house by Pyranha Mouldings, meant that the instant the electrical supply was restored, its power-operated doors swung shut and bolted from the outside. Metal bolts. On the outside. There was no emergency release inside. No alarm. The insulated walls swallowed the sound of a man screaming on a noisy factory floor.
No, dude.
Alan had a crowbar. He used it. The oven reached temperatures of up to 280 degrees Celsius. Court records indicate he died of shock within 10 minutes. Staff only opened the doors when they noticed smoke drifting out. Pyranha Mouldings was convicted of corporate manslaughter in January 2015. The verdict returned 10-2 by the jury at Liverpool Crown Court after a 5-week trial. The company was fined £200,000. Director Peter Macarith received a 9-month suspended sentence and a personal fine of £25,000. The HSE inspector who led the investigation said the way maintenance was carried out was fundamentally unsafe. Elway, Lewis, and Robert. January 16, 2017. Long Key Road, Key Largo, Florida. It's a Monday morning on a stretch of tourist road in the Florida Keys. Blue sky, palm trees, the kind of postcard backdrop that makes what's about to happen feel even more surreal. 4 utility workers employed by private contractor Douglas N. Higgins, Inc., have been sent to investigate a complaint. A section of recently paved road has developed a slight dip. They find a manhole cover near the end of the street, on the Gulf side of US 1. Routine stuff. One worker removes the cover. The drainage hole is just wide enough to fit a body, about 15 feet deep. Years of rotted vegetation at the bottom had been generating hydrogen sulfide and methane gas in concentrations nobody had tested for, because nobody had tested for anything. The area had smelled like rotten eggs for months. A local resident, Barbara Guerra, told reporters, "It was out here again this morning, and I'm used to it because they've been a whole year already." She used to bring the workers water. She knew their faces. The first man descended into the hole and went silent. The second climbed down to rescue him. He stopped responding. The third man entered to save both of them. All 3 were dead before anyone above ground fully understood what was happening. None of them were wearing respirators. No atmospheric tests had been run. No ventilation equipment had been set up. Elway Gray, 34. Lewis O'Keefe, 49. Robert Wilson, 24. 3 men in a hole barely wide enough to hold them, in the middle of the Florida Keys on a sunny Monday morning. A Key Largo firefighter, Leonardo Moreno, an 8-year veteran, responded to the 911 call. The entry point was too narrow for him to descend with his air pack, so he removed it. He was overcome within seconds and had to be dragged out. He was airlifted to hospital in critical condition. OSHA later cited Douglas N. Higgins for 10 serious violations, including failure to ventilate the confined space, failure to provide atmospheric monitoring, and failure to have rescue equipment present. The company had received a prior OSHA citation for a Marco Island manhole job in 2002. They knew. The protocol existed. They just didn't follow it. Rolan Hoskin. To understand how Rolan Hoskin died on June 29, 2000, you first need to understand Tyler Pipe. Tyler Pipe was a sprawling iron foundry on Route 69 in Tyler, Texas, a subsidiary of McWane, Inc., one of the largest cast iron pipe manufacturers in America. The New York Times, in a joint investigation with PBS Frontline, described it in January 2003 as part Dickens, part Darwin. Turnover was so high that the company recruited workers from local prisons. Unguarded machinery was a known hazard. Multiple OSHA violations had already accumulated. And in May of 2000, Rolan Hoskin took a maintenance job on the graveyard shift there because he needed the work. According to his family, Rolan told them repeatedly how dangerous the plant felt. Nobody showed him how to do anything properly. You were just expected to figure it out and keep production moving. At 4 o'clock in the morning on June 29, 2000, Rolan was working alone. A sand conveyor belt near one of the molding machines needed adjustment. He entered the sand pit where the belt was running. The conveyor was moving. It was not guarded. OSHA rules required it to be locked out and guarded before any worker entered that space. Neither had been done. Both were routinely ignored at Tyler Pipe. The belt grabbed him. OSHA's investigative photographs documented what happened. Rolan Hoskin never had a chance. He was pulled into the belt and pulley system and killed. After the accident, the company's position was that it was his fault. His daughter pushed back publicly. She said her father was not stupid. He didn't want to lose his job. He knew the place was dangerous and he went in anyway because that was the culture Tyler Pipe had built, where you do whatever it takes or you're out. OSHA proposed fines of over $1 million. In July 2002, Tyler Pipe pleaded guilty to criminal charges under federal law, a misdemeanor, the maximum available, and paid a fine of $250,000. A misdemeanor. For a man ground to death by a belt that should have been switched off. No manager went to prison. Rolan Hoskin was one of 9 workers killed in McWane plants between 1995 and 2003, against a backdrop of more than 4,600 reported injuries. His case was the only one that resulted in McWane being held criminally responsible under federal law. The bar was that low. Reginald Elston. On August 22, 2000, at McWane's Union Foundry plant in Anniston, Alabama, maintenance employee Reginald Elston was working near a conveyor belt. The belt did not have the safety guard required by OSHA regulations. Federal court documents would later confirm this was not a maintenance oversight or a day of unusual corner cutting. From March 17, 2000 through the day Reginald died, 5 full months, Union Foundry had been allowing employees to work on that same conveyor belt without a guard. Every single day. Management knew. It simply was not a priority. Union Foundry made ductile iron waterworks fittings. It was one of the McWane Corporation's family of foundries operating across the American South and Northeast. Plants described by federal prosecutors as having a systematic indifference to safety. The safety director at Union Foundry during this period was a man named Clyde Dorn. In testimony, Dorn described a workplace where safety decisions had to pass through plant management, where production pressure set the culture, and where fixing problems often meant waiting for permission that was slow to come. The unguarded conveyor had been flagged. Reginald Elston was caught in a pulley of the belt. He was crushed to death. Another employee found him. When federal investigators from the EPA and FBI arrived, this case was investigated jointly with environmental violations at the same plant. They found a facility that had been knowingly exposing workers to the hazard that killed Reginald for months. The plant was also illegally treating lead-contaminated hazardous waste without a permit, exposing workers to that as well. In September 2005, McWane's Union Foundry division pleaded guilty to a willful OSHA violation, resulting in Reginald's death. The criminal fine? $3.5 million. The company was placed on 3 years probation and ordered to contribute $750,000 to community service projects in the Anniston area. Clyde Dorn, the safety director who had been there throughout, was eventually fired. Not over Reginald's death, but because he was arrested for trafficking in the painkiller OxyContin. That detail has no punchline. It's just what the record says. Foundation Food Group. January 28, 2021. Foundation Food Group Poultry Processing Plant, Gainesville, Georgia, about 60 miles northeast of Atlanta, in a city sometimes called the poultry capital of the world. About 130 workers were on shift at the plant, which had been processing raw chicken for food service and commercial sale. The morning shift started normally. Somewhere in the facility, in the Line 4 immersion freezer room, a bent tube, likely damaged during a maintenance operation, had disabled the system that monitored and regulated liquid nitrogen levels. Liquid nitrogen is used in commercial freezing to flash chill meat product. It is colorless, odorless, and non-toxic in its gaseous state. The problem is what it displaces. When the bent tube failed, the freezer filled and then overflowed with liquid nitrogen, which vaporized instantly on contact with air and formed a cloud up to 5 feet high across the freezer room. The air became unbreathable. There were no oxygen monitors in the room. There was no alarm. Nobody outside the room knew what was happening inside it. 3 maintenance workers entered the freezer room. They collapsed. Other workers rushed in to help, as workers do, because their coworkers were down. At least 14 people entered the room or the surrounding area before the scope of the hazard was understood. 5 men and 1 woman were killed by asphyxiation. Jose de Jesus Elias Cabrera, 45. Corey Allen Murphy, 35. Nelly Perez Rafael, 28. Saulo Suarez Bernal, 41. Victor Belez, 38. Edgar Vera Garcia, 28. 5 of the 6 were Mexican citizens. 3 Gainesville firefighters and 1 Hall County firefighter were also injured in the response. The U.S. Chemical Safety and Hazard Investigation Board's final report called it completely preventable. A bent tube. A single point of failure with nothing else in the system to catch it. No air monitors. No alarms. No liquid nitrogen training for the workers who process chicken 10 feet from a cryogenic overflow hazard every single day. Foundation Food Group faced nearly $600,000 in OSHA fines. The company had allowed its safety management position to stay vacant for over a year before the incident. The safety job was empty. 6 people filled that gap instead. Ira Cofer. Not every story in here ends with a body count. January 1997. Tyler Pipe Foundry, Tyler, Texas. The same McWane plant we visited earlier with Rolan Hoskin. Ira Cofer was a mechanic. He was working near an unguarded moving conveyor when a sleeve of his clothing became entangled in the machinery. His arm was pulled under the belt system and trapped there. Because of layoffs, Ira was working alone. He couldn't free himself and he couldn't reach anything to call for help. He stayed conscious. He kept calling out. OSHA's accident report is precise about the timeline. Ira Cofer was missing for more than 2.5 hours while he was crying out for help the entire time. When workers finally heard him and found him, he was standing on top of his hard hat, trying to use the height to relieve some of the pressure on the arm that had been caught in the belt since it grabbed him. The belt had been running the whole time. "It rubbed it all down to the bone," Ira told Frontline years later. "Took all my flesh off." Surgeons fought to save whatever they could. The injuries were catastrophic. Ira survived, but the arm was essentially destroyed. His life after the accident was defined by medical bills, workers' compensation claims that made getting treatment a fight, and the particular cruelty of watching a company argue that its workers' comp obligations also shielded it from any further legal accountability. Management at Tyler Pipe did not speak publicly about Ira's case. The plant, cited for hundreds of OSHA violations over the following years, continued operating and continued injuring workers. 3 years after Ira was trapped, Rolan Hoskin was killed at the same plant, caught in the same kind of unguarded belt under the same conditions. OSHA had already flagged conveyor guarding violations at Tyler Pipe before Ira's accident, before Rolan's death. The fine after Rolan died was $250,000 and a misdemeanor. The belt was eventually guarded. The lesson cost 2 people everything they had.